Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Today, I have the privilege of being in conversation with an American tattoo artist, graphic novelist, filmmaker, and the co-creator of the AFRO-PUNK Festival, originally from New York City, now living in LA, Los Angeles. Please welcome James Spooner. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for popping on. Like, I had that really corny inclination of saying, "What's going on, Jay Spoon?" But that's not what we're doing. Jay Spoon.
It would be the first time I heard it. That's fine.
I had this question I asked someone the other day, and I might try to work it into this conversation. But I want to start off with kind of like how you present, how you frame yourself, because I gave that copy and paste bio. But for you, what is that most interesting characteristic that you would say this truly defines James Spooner or what have you? I had an interview yesterday and it had all of these superlatives. This is who this person is. And her response was, first and foremost, I'm a human. And I was like, I appreciate that. So for you, what would be your kind of thing with all of the tattoo artists, graphic knowledge, filmmaker, all of that? What is the thing for you?
Well, I mean, I definitely put art as a high priority in my daily life. And I don't really know how to get around that. That's just always, at least since high school, been just a reason to wake up in the morning.
Sure.
I am a father and I take that very seriously. I'm also a partner. I'm in a relationship, and I work very hard to not mess that up on a daily basis. Yeah, I mean, I'm just a person trying to find balance between all the things I love.
Yeah, balance is important, and when it's off, I just had that thing in my head. It's like, the balance is off. It's almost like disturbance in the force a little bit. It's like the balance is off. And I'll say that to my partner, mostly in those kind of like interpersonal situations, like especially like an office culture. It's just like, yo, somebody's not in the office today because people are just yelling. Something is stupid. What's happening here? And you just kind of just chalk it up. The balance is off. So, I think being able to maintain balance, especially when you're doing multiple things, because art is a thing. Like, I've kind of looked over some of the graphic novel stuff, and I was like, all right, this guy's super talented. So,
yeah.
Tell me about the process of putting together the graphic novel, the coming of age graphic memoir, The High Desert, and you're co-curating the second book entitled Black Punk Now, and a punk anthology. Could you describe the feelings in putting something together? Talk about the process and some of the feelings with revisiting, especially with the graphic novel, coming of age graphic novel, High Desert, revisiting some of those experiences.
Well, I guess just to kind of give a little bit of background,
Sure, please.
The memoir takes place over 1 year in my middle school, high school age time. At the time, I lived in this very small town in Southern California called Apple Valley. And there was when I say this is a small town, it's like, if you're going from Los Angeles to Vegas and you need to stop for gas, you would stop in the big town that's next to our town, like our town was the small town next to that town. That's really just a town to get gas. You know what I'm saying? There's no real reason for anyone to visit or, it's just a American small town, right?
Right.
In the desert. And in this place, this is where I found punk rock, and I was one of 2 Black kids who was in the scene. And there were a lot of racist, not just regular racist, microaggression racist, that was happening, but just Nazi skinhead kids, people just walking to school, people yelling nigger at me, just as I walked with my trapper keeper, you know what I'm saying?
Right. It's like, this is not the outfit.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just really it was at the time it was normal. So this is just what it was. But, you know, obviously, looking back, it was a really like terrible environment to grow up in. And so with the book, I really wanted to, you know, I first and foremost wanted to write a love letter to punk rock, you know, but because punk rock is so much of my life, my community, my family, I feel like I was raised by punk rock in so many ways. I also have no problem critiquing it, just like you would a cousin or a parent or something, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, the kind of things that my friends let slide, the kind of racist, you know, yeah, I'm friends with this Nazi, but he's cool kind of thing. Or the Nazi says I'm cool, so then I'm good with him, you know, like those kind of things that happen, you know, happened to me when I was just 13. You know, those are things that I really wanted to critique because I think there are they reflect the larger society, you know? Yeah. Now, in terms of, were you asking about process or were you talking about like more motivation?
So yeah, it's a second part to it. So the second part is the process, and I think I want to make it a little bit more general than initially I had it. Can you walk me through the process on taking on like new work or what have you? Like, what is that the first thing that you're doing, whether it is in putting together a book or whether it is and kind of maybe dabbling with filmmaking again or anything else that's a creative interest of yours? What is that first thing that you're doing? What's in the middle? And what's that kind of end of the process?
Well, I think I'm like a lot of people. I start a lot of projects and, you know, sometimes, and I either lose interest or I don't, you know? And sometimes the ones that I lose interest in, I come back to, or I revisit in a different way at a different time when I'm ready. You know, I've definitely got like more ideas than I have lifespan, you know, to get to. But really, I usually start with a lot of note taking, you know, brainstorming, just kind of like, I do a lot of, most of my work outside of tattooing has been really like personal memoir. Even Afropunk was like the Afropunk, the documentary was like, I would consider it a memoir. I just didn't put myself in it. You know, I let other people tell my story, you know? So yeah, it's just kind of a lot of like, what do I want to talk about in this piece? Like, what am I trying to, you know, there's a bit of discovery as you go, but I think starting off with like a clear intention is really valuable. So that way you don't meander into places that you don't waste time doing stuff you don't need to do, you know?
Yeah, it's like here's the essentials. This is on path. Why does this fit into what ultimately I'm aiming for? And
yeah, it's like, oh, I would love to tell this story, but it doesn't serve the larger story. Yeah. So I have to just drop it, you know? And then you know, once in the middle, like once I'm in it, I usually get this sense by the time I'm in the middle space, I'm like, okay, I've already involved other people. You know, I've interviewed people. I've taken photographs of people. I've, you know, invested other people's time, and I have a certain obligation to them to complete it, you know? And also I'm kind of like, I always ask myself, like, if I wasn't doing art, what would I just, you know, like, what would I do? I know a lot of people just go to work and then they come home and they watch like 5 hours of television and then they go to sleep, right? Yeah. And I do that, but in that, while I'm watching that 5 hours of television, I'm also like drawing, you know. I try to organize my day where it's like, what can I do during that 5 hours? You know, like, because, you know, that's just sitting there seems real. Like, I don't know how to do that.
Do you enjoy kind of working on multiple things kind of at one time and just seeing like, all right, I've been working on this. Let me switch gears. I'm running up towards a block. So for instance,
I kind of hate it.
Oh, really?
Like,
okay.
Yeah. I feel like once I commit myself to a project, for better or worse, everything else falls away. And I have to just force myself to stop in order to just like eat or walk the dog or, you know, go pick up my kid from school or whatever it is, like take a vacation, you know, like that kind of stuff is really hard for me. And but it's essential to my mental health, because I have definitely, you know, in my 20s, when I didn't have all those outside responsibilities, just like worked myself into, you know, like I stay up until I feel like my eyes are bleeding and like I'm sleeping on the, you know, like I fall asleep on the keyboard or something, you know, or like, one time I woke up and I just had this, I was sleeping and I heard this like crack in my neck. And I thought it was just like, I don't know, it sounded like a knuckle crack, but it was like, there was so much pain. I broke something in my neck. I don't know. And it took like, I stood up to like, oh, maybe like it was the middle of the night. So I'm like, oh, maybe I'll shower and like loosen it up or something. And I fainted on the way. And like my head went through a table.
Oh, like, no.
And that was like, because I didn't rest. Like I just, you know, I had this crappy desk and a crappy workstation, you know, and I would just like be hunched over in this bad posture for months, you know, and it's just like, so I have to have these outside things that tell me to chill. But if I had like a second project, you know, it's like, it's so hard to put aside the first project to work on the second one, you know, like, because I'm always just like, I could be finishing this. Why am I? You know?
Yeah. I do this podcast and I do a movie review podcast, and this one takes up the majority of my time, and I have the day job. And I'll say, I get crap from my partner. She'll say like, did you sleep in the studio on the floor again? She's like, you have a bed. I was like, I was busy being productive. She was like, no, you fell asleep after you did a podcast and you were watching wrestling or something. That's what happened. And I was like, you know me so well, but it's kind of that thing where I get energized from like this space that I'm in currently. This is where all of my cool stuff is at. This is where I feel at my freest. And I'd never want to put a bed in here. I want to keep it as a creative space and as where I do my work. But sometimes I might get tired after doing like 4 podcasts in a day, and I want to be on task. And I think recognizing, I think you touched on it very well, of knowing when I need to take these breaks for my mental health and being aware of that. Like, if you're doing 15 interviews in a week, you're taking in a lot of extra energy sometimes and talking with folks and them sharing maybe at times intimate details that are a part of their process or was baked into their work. And it doesn't just go away. I'm actively listening. So I'm like, wow, I am tired. I need to rest. And it might be, let me take a week off or 2 from doing this in this way, because I'm running a little too, because I'm in my late 30s. So I'm running a little too, I'm coming up on 40. So it's like, I'm running a little too much now. I need to slow down, you know, take a breather, have dinner.
Yeah, it definitely, I'm having that awakening right now about my age, because I booked this like really intense book tour that is taking me all around the country. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting booking it. It's exhausting doing it, you know, like that. And it's a lot, you know, like, and then I'm there and I'm on and I'm excited. I'm enjoying it. And then I leave and I'm like, man, I am exhausted and I got to do this tomorrow. Or, I got to get on a plane at 4 a.m. because now the TSA makes you wait forever and all of this, it's a lot. And, I'm in my mid 40s. And if it was when I was doing this in my 20s, it was fun. It was chill. I don't remember stressing.
It's like, oh, this is different. This is great. It's like, are you sure you remember it well?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but I remember even like, going on tour with bands when I was a teenager, and like we didn't have places to stay. We were like dumpster diving for food. Like, I mean, it was real survival out there, and we were having the time of our lives. Yeah,
so. That's great. So I got this next question. I have a bigger one after this, but I have this next question because we'd like to talk about arts and culture in this podcast, and it's incumbent upon me to ask about like some of the things that, from your vantage point, identify a culture or a scene, specifically in punk. From your experience, like what would you say are some of those traits that you're like, that's punk, that isn't? And that may be a weird question, but what are some, when you think of punk, what are some of those things that pop in your head?
I definitely have strong feelings about what I think is punk. And I guess I should preface by saying that like punk rock has been around for over 40 years, and 40 years is a good amount of time to build a diverse community, with a lot of opinions and a lot of lanes, So there are lanes of punk that I have zero interest in. And, if I stumble across those worlds, I feel like, yeah, these aren't my people, Yeah. And then there are the opposite, right? So for me, like, and I traveled through a lot of it throughout my life, So for me, where I landed in my kind of like heyday was the DIY punk scene, which is very focused on putting on our own shows, not worrying about like the club circuit, putting together, zines, putting out our own labels. Like I was a kid in high school who, like the lane of punk I lived in was, we as a community did not buy records that had barcodes on it. Like that was a stance. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Which meant that you really couldn't buy records at a record store, and this was in the 90s when record stores were where you got records.
Right.
So it limited the lane. It didn't feel limited at the time, because kids were so productive. But, I got records at shows. I had my own distribution. I had my own record label. I traded records so that I could sell records at shows that were of other bands, and other labels. And it's really a community that feeds into itself, So that's a lot different than, the New York hardcore scene that is reliant on record stores and all the various bars in the city, or the Warped Tour kind of punk scene, or I don't know. There's a lot of different like lanes, and it really, I think a lot of it has to do with like where you live,
Sure. Yeah.
Because if you're in like the suburbs, you don't have access to bars or whatever that are also doing all ages shows. So you're going to put on a show in like a VFW hall or in your friend's basement or something. And although I lived in New York City, I liked that stuff better. So I traveled out of New York City on the weekends to go to to that lane, you know? And it's also way more political and engaged and just not about like being like a tough guy or something, which was a lot of what New York was about, you know?
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you for walking us through that.
Yeah.
So we've had some experiences. I want to talk about this question here. Having a wide array of interests that aren't quote unquote Black. I had a hard time in middle school and in high school. And ironically, I started to come out of it like not really fitting in, not feeling like, oh, am I Black enough? Am I this? Am I that? And I went to an HBCU, and that's when I started to come out of it. But I still struggle with it at times. Like, hey, I like Japanese wrestling. That's not Black. There's only one Black story. Or I remember I met one of my good friends at the time. I knew that he was straight edge, and he was like, I didn't expect a Black dude to know that. And I was like, I'm listening to the bravery and a mix of that and like the Clash. So I'm just here doing this. And I've become more discerning with who I spend time with and who I invest energy in because I'm aware of that now. Mm-hmm. So I've come across this notion of finding a tribe. Can you describe what it means to find your tribe, and what was that kind of moment for you? Or are you still experiencing that and kind of like as you matriculate and get older?
Yeah, I mean, I think that looking for a group of people who understand you, make you feel validated, or like make you feel like a valid person, you know, like those are quests that probably everybody is going through at some point, you know, but it's definitely more difficult if you are in the minority in a community, you know. So being a Black punk rocker as a teenager, there was definitely a lot of like prioritizing, you know, like, okay, am I going to, do I want to hang out with the Black kids because they're Black? Or do I want to hang out with the kids who like the same kind of music as me and have the same politics as me and whatever, right? Yeah. And it is, I really feel for people who don't have an option to like pick both, you know? And I lived in New York City, and I went to a school that was very like racially diverse. And I lived downtown in the Village. So I was able to like hang with kids of color who were into the stuff I was into, whether it was punk rock, skateboarding, you know. I mean, I was in Washington Square Park, so I was hanging out with ravers, like whoever, you know, just like the weirdos, right? And a lot of them were Black and or people of color. So it wasn't terrible. But then when I started, like I said before, going to the suburbs to see shows, because that felt more like the kind of punk that I wanted to embrace, then I was hanging out with a lot of white kids. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't help but feel out of place at times. Right. You know, I couldn't help but recognize their privilege in a way that they didn't. And this was like before we were, as a society, talking about privilege, you know? Right. You know, I think that like, there was definitely a time where I was like, fuck this punk shit, hanging out with Black people. And, you know, I moved to Crown Heights. I was like in the fucking thick of Caribbean culture. I'm Caribbean, so I was like, these are my people, you know? And I quickly realized that like, I don't jive with the mainstream regardless of what race they are, you know? Yeah. So I love my family, but I'm not down to go to church, you know? I'm not down to like watch Tyler Perry movies or whatever. Like, that's just, it doesn't like move me, you know? They move me, but that doesn't move me, right? But that doesn't, but I would I don't want anyone to hear that sentence and then be like, oh, well, you can't hang out with Black people, because I found, you know, I was a DJ and party promoter. I like soul music. I DJ'd that kind of music. And I found like the house scene. I found the, that like kind of early neo soul scene or whatever. And I recognized that that was a lane of Black weirdos that were just not necessarily punk, or into rock and roll, though there was a very eclectic taste. We were there to like dance, right?
Yeah.
And I liked that, and I liked hanging with those people. But then I started to miss punk, So that's when I started making Afro-Punk around that same time, because I wanted to explore this very question, And in this exploration, I found that not only do Black punks have similar stories of like feeling like outsiders, but a lot of like quote unquote normal Black people feel that way too. People who like, just work a corporate job, people who like were the only Black person in their fraternity, people who, whatever it is, like, there's always this lane of this monolithic lane of what Black people are supposed to do. And then there's all the other Black people.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And I feel like, I don't know if there's more of the others or not, it doesn't feel that way. But, the other day I was in the park and I was listening to this, what is it? Like the guy, the maintenance man for the park, right? He wasn't just a maintenance man. He was like the gardener, like the
caretaker.
Yeah. Like and he was talking to his friend, or he was talking to some guy about how Black people don't do this job.
Right.
Black people aren't like horticulturalists or whatever, Yeah. And I was like, what a boring life that Black people have to live, that we're not allowed to garden.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? The other day, my kid was, she's into rock stuff and she's learning bass, and she was talking to her cousin who's just like super basic. And she was like, "You playing bass? That's some white people shit." And I'm like, bass?
No.
Like, are we that like, like we're so tight and conservative as a people that we can't, that even when we do some authentically Black shit, like playing bass, it's like, but are you playing hip hop songs on that bass? Like, I mean, because if you're not in the roots, then you're not, like, you can't be in a band.
There's no instruments for you.
I mean, it's just, it's, you really have to laugh because it's so ridiculous, So, so that said, in making Afro-Punk and creating, doing shows and, I was finding my community of like, oh, I don't have to compromise. I can find Black weirdos who are like into rock and who are into just other stuff, right? Like, I don't even care what kind of music you listen to. If you're into Japanese wrestling and you're a Black person, we probably can relate. You know what I'm saying? So I'm into that. I'm into those kind of people. That said, it's like, now I live in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is super segregated in a way that New York is segregated, but it's different. All right. So now I find myself missing Black people, like I have Black friends, but not as many as I had in Brooklyn,
Right.
So when I find myself in a room and I'm like one of a few people of color or the only Black person in this collective of dinner party or whatever, like there is a mourning, I do feel a loss. But I'm also thankful that I know that it's not impossible. You know what I'm saying? Because I feel like there are a lot of Black people who seclude themselves into a world of white people and don't believe that there are any Black people out there that they could connect with, and that feels like some internalized racism, because they haven't even given their birth community the choice to they haven't even delved in far enough to find that, like, oh, you know what? Not all Black people are, you know, I don't want to even make it stereotype. Whatever like the super basic Black thing is, you know, like we do other things.
While you're watching Versus or whatever the thing is. And I think that it's interesting, like, you know, I like that you use like the term like Black weirdo, and you know, my partner's from Brooklyn, y'all around the same age, and she uses that terminology all the time. And she was and still is a huge Prince fan. And she was like, yeah, that was like the first Black weirdo on and she's like, that's who I look for, and like these are the people that I want to be around. And she's like, yeah, I'm putting on eyeliner and I'm doing all of this different stuff. But then like now she looks like a Bratz doll. She has like the red hair, and she knows these things about herself, and she writes really off-color comics at times, and it's all of these different things. And she was like, I look like this, but I love horror movies and I drink beer, and these are things that quote unquote Black women don't do. And I'll leave on this before I go to this last and final real question. I go to BlurredCon. It's a event for blurreds, and sometimes they're it's a focus in that area, but it's also inclusive. And I think some people kind of miss that. And it's like, you're around people who have similar interests. And, you might not have like the same anime you're into, or you might not be reading the same comics, but you're here under this kind of umbrella, this kind of banner of, this is fandom. This is stuff that you're into. You'll enjoy this. This is fun. And, which is proof positive that your people are out there. Sometimes it might take a little more work to find them, but once you find them, that's a tight-knit community.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing is like, it takes somebody to organize it, right? Somebody was like, oh, okay, like, I want to have a convention for Black nerds, for, people who are into like fandom, right? Yeah. I can't be the only one,
Right.
And then they do it, and then then the people come out and they're like, oh, hey, I'm one of those too, Yeah. And that's, I think that's what happens when people are vocal and organized and, and challenge the status quo, right?
Right.
We need that, the mainstream will always, there will always be a mainstream, and we need that mainstream so that we can push off of it and be underground, Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's just, it just has to be that way, but it can be a painful journey.
I agree. So this is the last real question, and it's a bit of a ridiculous question, but also I think it could be a timeless question. I mean, a timely question. If you were to go back on the road, and I know you talked about this a little bit as far as the book goes, but if you would go back on the road and do a temperature check and create like the Afro-Punk 20 years later kind of doc, because we're more than 20 years removed. It was 2001 when you were doing a lot of the filming, right? And it was released in 2003. So what do you think you would like learn? What do you think that you would kind of grab about the scene, within like the Black punk scene, like now versus over the last 2 decades versus what was in the original doc?
Well, I think the main difference, like all the things that are in the Afropunk doc, I think are still things that individuals experience.
Sure.
But the difference overall is that there are more loud Black and people of color in the punk scene who are organizing, like I just said, right? Yeah. And I've met and gone to the events of several different. Let me start again. I mean, as of now, there are, 7 to 10 different festivals / collectives of POC punk that are focused on POC punk,
sure.
Right? And almost all of them are organized by Black women or Black non-binary people. And I find it interesting that they don't focus on Black people. They focus on people of color within the scene. And I think that that's just a reflection of the times, maybe, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, the overwhelming feeling that I get is that punk is either a lot more brown than it used to be, or the brown people are a lot louder than they used to be. Right?
Yeah.
I think that, or I know that most of these festivals, these organizers created these festivals in reaction to Afropunk. Not the film, but in reaction to the festival.
Right.
You know, because the festival doesn't represent them.
Right.
You know, I think the stories I've heard is that, you know, they were younger kids. They heard about Afropunk back when, like, it was still had some rock and roll stuff happening, you know, and they were like, oh my God, I want to go. Then they finally went and they were like, oh, this, like, is corporate. This is like, I mean, it's cool, you know, like, I'm not going to sit here and say that Afropunk is irrelevant.
Right.
It's not at all. It's valuable, but it doesn't have punk values, you know? Right. It's just not, it's owned by a billionaire, you know? It's owned by the Essence Corporation, you know? Like, it's not a DIY venture by any stretch of the imagination, you know? So the rock and roll bands that they have, it's just paying lip service to the name that they acquired, you know, in order to keep the brand. But, you know, it's an R&B festival, and that's fine, you know? But these kids who were searching for their people got there and didn't meet their people, you know? Right. So they were like, well, fuck it, I'm going to do my own thing, which is how like things always happen. It always grows like that. You know, the underground is always reacting to the mainstream. So, you know, Afropunk started off as underground, you know, and then it became mainstream. And then, so the underground has to react to it, against it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, you know, I guess to answer your question, it comes back to the idea that, you know, when I made Afropunk, the movie, it was because there was no conversations happening around what it means to be a person of color in this progressive white community.
Right.
You know, now those conversations are happening all the time, and there's you know, Break Free Fest in Philly. There's Punk Black in Atlanta. There's Black and Brown Fest in Texas. There's Chicanas in the Pit in Texas. There's Decolonize in London. There's Decolonize in Berlin. Like, it's happening all over the place.
Yeah.
You know? And then in LA, it's so brown that they don't even have to call it anything. It's just a brown scene. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's just this thing where I wouldn't have even needed, if I grew up right now in my early 20s or teens, I would never even think to make Afropunk, because I wouldn't need to, because we're already talking about it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I dig it. So that's the end of, like, the real questions. And I got a couple quick rapid fire questions for you. Don't overthink them. Don't belabor them, because we always do it.
Clearly, I'm chatty over here. So
no. I appreciate it, and I'm like, I think in recently watching the doc, it's almost like this extra layer of being immersed into, like, what's going on, what's baked into the work, and also watching several interviews of yours on YouTube. I was doing some stalking. Sorry, James. I don't know what to tell you.
It's all good. It's good. I hope that I'm saying something different here.
No. So, all right. First one. Do you collect anything? And if so, what do you collect?
I used to collect books. I had lots, but I got rid of a lot. I don't really collect anything right now.
Okay. No. This is a word this is a question I really like. What is your favorite word in a language other than your primary language?
Oh, well, I really like the name Sheboygan, like the town of Sheboygan.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's the Native American word. I've never been, but I just really like saying that word.
Yeah.
So I would use that word, Sheboygan.
Okay.
Say it. It's fun to say.
Sheboygan. I put a lot of oomph on that, didn't I? What you mentioned, like putting in those hours, watching some television or what have you. What have you most recently binged?
Okay, most recently we just finished Stranger Things.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, that wasn't super interesting.
Oh no, not at all, not at all. I mean, I can talk about Stranger Things all the time. I mean,
I also just binged Dear Victor.
Okay, I've not seen that.
It's fun.
Okay,
it's fun.
I watch a lot of horror movies over the weekend, so I was just like watching In the Mouth of Madness, which is, I believe it's a John Carpenter, and I was like, this is a bit much. It's like, do you read Sutter Kane?
Yeah, I can't even have a conversation with you about horror. Stranger Things is as scary as I get.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I watch a lot of horror movies. What was your first show or album that like you got? You know, like you could have went to a show, what have you, and you talked about how albums in that situation earlier. So either or, first show or first album.
Well, you can read all about my first show in the high desert.
Nice. It's a great plug, by the way.
Okay, so actually, my first show, the first band I ever saw was Sha Na Na at the Victor Valley Fairgrounds. Yeah. And you probably don't even know who Sha Na Na is.
I might know who Sha Na Na is.
They're like they were kind of like a 50s revival, kind of like in the 70s, people like the 50s. So they were kind of like, anyways, it's stupid. Then my first like show in the scene was a Christian metal show, which is at the Apple Valley Community Center, and that's in my book. Mm-hmm. And then my first real punk show was this band Violent Outrage played at Rack and Roll. And what's great about that is that show is on YouTube, and the person who filmed it got bored of the band, walked into the audience, found me, and started talking to me about music. And I was like such a poser. I was like, I don't know, I like Sex Pistols. But it's proof that it's like proof of life. I was 14 years old or 13 years old.
I've been around.
There's a VHS, of me at my first show. It's amazing.
That's fantastic. Okay, here's the last one. And this is a little bit of a softball, but it also might be a little trolly. Name a 4-letter word that starts off with the letter P.
P?
Yes.
A 4-letter word, like a bad word?
No, just 4 letters, yeah.
I don't know. Pale?
Okay, it's interesting you didn't say punk. Interesting. Very interesting. Little trolly there.
Damn, got me.
Hey, but one of the questions used to be, what's your favorite, the first letter of your favorite curse word? And I kept getting F. I was like, wow, it's a very sailory audience here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
So I want to thank you for being on this podcast. This has been a lot of fun, and truly, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a true privilege. And I want to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks where to pick up anything, pick up your book, all of that good stuff. Pretty much the floor is yours. Shamelessly plug and tell folks where to find you at online and all.
Thank you. All right. Well, I'm easily accessible. Instagram, Spooner's No Fun is my handle. That's also Facebook /Spooner's No Fun. My tattoo work is Monocle Tattoo. That's like the eyepiece monocle. Those are also my .coms, Spooner's No Fun and .com and monocletattoo.com. If you want to get the book, The High Desert, it's a major publication, so you can get it at any bookstore, or you can order it through, it's just type in The High Desert, James Spooner, and you'll find a bazillion places to get it, Totally. And you can watch Afropunk for free on YouTube. And that's about all I got. Oh, you can contact me for tattoos if you're in LA. I do both vegan tattoos and specialize on dark skin. So,
because you're special. You came up with the vegan tattoos too, right?
I was the first person in California to do them.
Big shout out. Big shout out to you on that one. I think I'll have to hit you out when I'm out there in LA. I'm planning a trip, so we'll be talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give me some fun nerdy junk. I'm down.
I'm here for it. So there we go. That's pretty much it for the podcast. So I want to again thank James Spooner for coming on. Spooner, you are fun, I'll say. And I'm Rob Lee saying that there is art, community, conversation in your neck of the woods. You just got to look for it.